We welcome you to another edition of Being Well Informed. My name is Claudia Barber. I am your podcast host, and I am delighted to share with you another edition of Being Well Informed. Today, we have an exciting opportunity to share with you what is going on in the Maryland legislature and a group Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women is here to talk about bills that passed during the 2024 Maryland General Assembly. Hello there, our guest president of MLAW. We appreciate you coming on board today. Hello.
Hello,
How are you?
I am fine.
Ms. Cohen, you are the president of MLAW.
Yes, we call
Tell
it
us about
MLAW.
your.
Yeah. It's the Maryland Legislative Agenda for Maryland Women. And we are uh, a 30-year-old organization. This is our 30th anniversary year. And we were formed to harness the collective power of women and advocates for legislation that improves the lives of women and families. So um, we're a statewide nonprofit coalition of individuals and organizations that produces and distributes an annual legislative agenda uh, with proposed bills selected by our members. And we coordinate with lead groups, we advocate for the bills, and we provide legislative alerts.
That's good.
And
That's
we
good.
have successfully supported 119 bills that have been passed by the Maryland General Assembly in the last 30 years.
Very impressive. Very impressive. And how long have you existed?
30 years.
30 years. So, I gather you started as a small entity and you just kind of grew
We
in
did.
membership?
We did. And in more recent years, we have doubled the participation and the membership in our organization. So it's a very exciting time for women and for advocates throughout the state in terms of advocating for legislation that impact women and families.
So, during that 90-day session from January all the way through April, how do you start the go button and the end button?
Well, we hold an annual legislative conference every fall. And at that conference, advocates and legislators present legislative proposals, usually anywhere from 15 to 20, uh, on a variety of issues. And then after that conference is over, we send a list of issues to our paid members, and they rank those issues according to what they think are the most important ones that we should put in our legislative agenda document. And usually we choose maybe 6 to 8. This year we had 9 issues on our agenda because there were so many really important issues to consider. And then during the session, uh, we coordinate with those groups and legislators. We send legislative alerts. We rally people around these issues. And we send the document to every legislator and advocates throughout the state so that they know which issues are really important to women across the state.
Of course, the question also becomes, since there are literally thousands of bills introduced each session, we're now in the month of May, and the governor has signed over 1,000 bills. He's only vetoed, I think, about 4 bills. So, how do you get a handle on knowing the most important bills which impact women?
Well, we really do rely on our lead groups. These are advocacy groups that have formed around a variety of issues, and our legislators who also bring us legislation. So, again, those bills are presented at the conference, and then our members uh, select those bills through the ballot. We also ask people before the agenda document is published to sign on in support of the agenda. That gives it a lot of power. And you don't have to be a member to sign on. It can be anybody who supports the agenda issues. So the perception certainly is that we are a powerful group that represents women throughout the state.
Now, you mentioned the bills becoming important to track. So, what were you tracking specifically this particular Maryland General Assembly session?
Yeah, we had 9 bills on this year's agenda, and 7 of them passed. We usually have a really successful track record. Last year, all of the bills on the agenda passed, and that was fantastic. But this year, 7 of them passed, and I can tell you a little about each of them.
Yes, please
Very
share.
quickly. The first one was sexual crimes, definition of consent and repeal of force. And that altered the elements of second-degree rape to remove the requirement of use of force or threat of force. And that's very important because in these situations, that threat of force or the use of force is not always explicit, and yet clearly there is an assault or there is a rape that occurs. And we want to make sure that in these cases, that victims are not re-victimized by a lack of clarity in the law. Another one was criminal law sexual solicitation of a minor through child pornography prohibition. And that expanded the sexual solicitation of a minor to include the production of child pornography. And it prohibits an individual from knowingly soliciting a minor or law enforcement officer posing as a minor to engage in certain prohibited sexual acts. So again, it was kind of gap in the law. We wanted to make sure that minors that are being solicited for child pornography are covered by the law. And so that, remedied that. The next.
Well, it sounds like the first bill that you mentioned definitely impacts women who are not necessarily fighting back when they're sexually assaulted.
Right.
Because it's helping them.
Right. And, many women in these situations, they will freeze, or they will feel that fighting back may endanger them more. And they also may, the fear may not be explicit, it may be implicit. So we want to make sure that people are covered in those situations. And it's very hard to prosecute and prove rape and sexual offense. So we want to, remove as many barriers to that as possible so that victims have recourse through the legal system.
That's good. So the third bill that was something that passed, it was involving what specifically?
Affirming the Federal Equal Rights Amendment.
All right.
And basically, the Equal Rights Amendment was passed in 1972. It's taken all this many years to get the 38 states to ratify it. It took longer than we had hoped. And this is a resolution that was passed by the General Assembly that urges the President and the Congress to affirm the validity of the Equal Rights Amendment and direct the Archivist of the United States to certify and publish it as the 28th Amendment. And the coalition that organized around this effort nationally is encouraging states around the country to do the same. So we hope that many states will pass similar resolutions and that this will be effective.
So at this particular point in time, we still don't have enough states.
No, well, they've all ratified, but there is an issue about whether they ratified in a timely manner. And so these resolutions are to reinforce the idea that, in fact, this has passed muster and that this should be the 28th Amendment. And it's about time that we had an Equal Rights Amendment in this country.
All right. So Maryland has an Equal Rights Amendment.
We do. We do.
All right. So
this is the national. This would be the federal.
This is sort of a national referendum or initiative. But in the 1970s, when the Equal Rights Amendment was continuing its move towards becoming an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, there was so much of an uproar about the ERA. and the fact that you had one sect of the population saying, "Well, this is going to cause all women to be drafted in the army," and you had many opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment. Has that changed now that it's 2024?
Well, I think some of it's changed. Obviously, women have moved into many positions, in many fields that they could not aspire to before. And in fact, women are now in combat positions, and they do serve in the military. And we have a volunteer military at this point. There's not a draft, but there are still many positions that women have to fight to be considered for. And I think this would move that in a more positive direction. We have plenty of work still to do, both in Maryland and nationally. And we can also see, given recent changes in the law, that some of the rights that we had taken for granted are being reversed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we still have to continue to fight for these rights.
Well, that brings up the abortion agenda. That also brings up issues like oftentimes the equal pay gap, equal work for equal pay and the pay gap. Do you consider the pay gap still something that's existing or something that's behind us?
Oh, no, it still exists. Recent studies have shown that women still make about 84 cents every dollar that a man makes. Black women are paid 64 cents. Latino women, 55 cents of every dollar that a white man makes. So, we still have a long way to go. And in fact, this year we did pass another piece of legislation that may be of interest. It's called Labor and Employment, Equal Pay for Equal Work, Wage Range Transparency. And that requires employers to include pay ranges and a general description of benefits and other compensation in job postings. And that's going to, I think, help to make, pay scales much more transparent. And it'll really reveal where there are those real discrepancies and gaps in pay equity. So we hope that the passage of that legislation also is useful.
That's exciting news that the work of the Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women includes, hopefully, efforts to close the pay gap. And there's just continues to be this gender bias. And so, that kind of brings me to my question of why do you still need women organizations if everybody's equal?
Well, we're not. I mean, there's still a lot of differences and a lack of gender equity, obviously, in many professions, in many fields, and many opportunities for promotion. So we still have a long way to go. Let me give you another example of a place where there is a disparity in the way that workers are treated, and particularly where there are a majority of women workers. And this was another bill that passed this year. It's called Residential Services Agencies Reimbursement Personal Assistance Services, the Home Care Workers' Rights Act of 2024. And this legislation authorizes the Maryland Department of Health to reimburse a residential service agency for personal assistance services if they are provided by an employee. And why this is important is that home care workers, of which 84% of them are women, and this is a huge growing field, obviously, who work for these agencies should be, as employees, titled to overtime, sick and safe leave, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation. And many of them now are treated as individual contractors without any of those benefits. And this would insist that if you get Medicare, Medicaid, or Medicare payments, the agency does, they have to treat these folks as employees so they get those benefits. And, this disproportionately hurts women workers when they are not eligible for those benefits. And and because this is a growing field, predominantly female, this is an area that I think requires a lot of changes in order to treat people fairly.
Well, I'm glad that the Maryland legislative agenda for women is staying laser focused on this important aspect of inequities in the law. That because oftentimes I genuinely see laws as just words on paper. You have to get the enforcement mechanism as part of this process so
Right.
that the law is followed. Otherwise, we're just kind of still working in our same um, areas of blindness, of inequities, or feeling that there are no consequences when there are inequities in
Yeah,
place.
yeah. Enforcement is huge, and that's something I think we all need to work more on, because once a bill is passed, it doesn't mean that all the problems are solved. It has to be enforced, and it has to be enforced throughout the state. One of the other things that we've worked a lot on over the years has been access for reproductive services, and that's obviously a big issue right at the moment. But one of the other bills that we supported that passed this year was a bill called Reproductive Healthcare Clinic Security Grant Program. And that assists clinics with the costs associated with security improvements and safety operational expenses. So we want to make sure that people who access healthcare clinics are safe, that the providers are safe, the patients are safe. And that's really important as well. So it's not just about access, it's making sure that people who access the services can access them safely.
Other bills that passed this legislative session that were eyed by MLAW.
Yeah, one of the others was the legally protected healthcare gender affirming treatment. And that one extended the current shielding protection that protects reproductive health care providers to cover gender affirming care. And people may be familiar with a bill that passed last year that protects people who come, particularly from out of state, from states that don't provide that service, and come to Maryland, and make sure that that providers who provide that treatment here in Maryland can provide it without fear of being prosecuted by outside states. And this year they extended it to gender affirming care. And we know that that's huge because so many states are prohibiting people from getting either reproductive or gender affirming care in their own states. And they're coming to Maryland. And we want to make sure that providers and patients here are protected from prosecution or from demands about records, anything. And so this extended the law to gender affirming care.
So does that make Maryland sort of a safe harbor state?
Uh, Whatever you want to call it. Yeah. I mean, obviously people are coming here for services that they can't receive elsewhere. And
So
we expect that to increase.
you expect that particular area
Oh yeah,
increases.
yeah. And there have been a number of bills that have been passed recently in the recent years to try to help that expansion, expanding the kinds of people that can provide those services, physicians assistants and nurse practitioners and other people, in addition to physicians, that can provide certain reproductive services so that it expands the availability of those services here in our state. I mean, to both Marylanders and people who come from outside.
And I would imagine the same holds true for the abortion access.
Yes, yes.
So that people who, let's say, have restrictive or live in a state that has restrictive abortion rights can travel across state lines and land in Maryland and have some greater protection.
Yes, yes, yes. Now, I mean, obviously, it would be better if they could get that closer to home, but obviously, in many cases, that's not possible.
So I thank you so much for the work that you're doing because it is impactful in the sense that there seems to be, again, a need for a Maryland agenda for women every year. And so the work is not done, wouldn't you say? Or
And we invite people to get involved, to get on our mailing list, to come to our events, to learn more about these issues. We have a conference that will be held this fall in November, on the 23rd of November, at the Meeting House in Columbia. That will be an in-person event. People can come and learn a lot more, and interact with advocates and legislators throughout the state to learn more about how they can get involved and make a difference.
well, a lot of times laws are created by incidents or accidents or situations or experiences that people may have, and we find that well, wait a minute, the law doesn't protect that. So then we got to go back and go, no, we've got to write that down.
Right. And we
And
find, yeah, that there are these gaps and that we hadn't recognized existed. And we have to go back and we have to tinker with these things. I mean, there are many times, sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's, there's a real legislative issue.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it's never ending.
It is never ending. Any more laws that we leave out, or did we cover all 9?
There were a couple that did not pass.
Mhm.
And one was a firearms background checks, victim notification, and the Maryland State Gun Center, which would have established a process and a requirement for law enforcement and victim notification if a prohibited person attempted to purchase a firearm and failed the background check. And this is mostly in cases of protective orders, where somebody
Mhm.
is under a protective order and then tries to get a firearm. And this would require the victim notification by law enforcement. That did not pass, I think, primarily for financial reasons. There was a fiscal note. We know that this is a tough year for anything that costs money. And so I think that was the major problem with that, although it's really important because people who are under protective orders were not allowed to own or possess firearms.
Mhm.
Um, they should not, if they attempt to get one, the victim needs to know that. Another one was the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, victims of non-fatal strangulation. Non-fatal strangulation is a huge indicator of potential lethality. Even if it's not successful, it is a major risk factor in potential lethality in the future. And so one of the things we wanted to see was having the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board pay for medical treatment in those instances, and to be able to document that, obviously. And again, that
Very
had a
important.
fiscal note, and
Mhm.
that appeared to be the reason that it did not pass.
Wow, you have all done tremendous work, and as you mentioned before, the battle is not over, the struggle is not over, and the work of your MLAW organization is not finished.
It is not. we
So
we
there's
have a
more
way.
to come. There's more to do.
There's a lot more.
And the public is invited, especially women, to the November event. Is it in Columbia, you said?
This year it will be in Columbia. We move it around the state. It will be at the Meeting House in Columbia, and if you sign up for our constant contact list, you'll get notification of all the details of that. We also do a legislative briefing during the session where we introduce the issues on the agenda, and then we do a wrap up. And the last few years, those have been by Zoom. So people can sit at home and get more information about these legislative issues if they can't actually come in person. But one of the great things about coming in person is the networking opportunities, the ability to meet other people who are interested in these issues, and to see, in person people presenting. And it's very exciting. There's a lot of energy in the room when we have these conferences in person, which we've been able to do since the pandemic.
Well, we have crawling on our screen at the bottom the website for Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women, and I believe it is MD Agenda for Women.org.
Right.
Did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
Great, great, great. Well, we must have you back because, as you shared with us, this is not an issue that is over. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being a part of being well informed.
Thank you for having me.